ABBA have given the world some of the most powerful and memorable songs in pop history.
They're legends. They're living legends.
You know it immediately, that style, that sound.
It's very evocative. It just gets in there somehow.
Their music has stood the test of 5 decades and is celebrated the world over.
There was no hype that they had to live up to. They created their own hype.
But 40 years ago, it was a different story. The band fell apart and ABBA slipped into obscurity.
Suddenly, ABBA began looking a little bit passé.
We tell a remarkable tale that spans 4 decades. How Benny and Björn experimented with new music and new artists.
It was an absolute thrill. I couldn't believe it that we made it to #1.
While Agnetha and Frida both chased international solo successes.
I remember being amazed when Phil Collins said, "Frida from ABBA has asked me to do an album."
But their lives would be littered with tragedy and loss. In this extraordinary documentary, we hear from the band's close friends.
I'm not surprised that they took a break because they wanted another playground.
Collaborators.
Benny told me about the project and I thought it was really exciting.
Music industry insiders.
Seeing her back as a more mature, confident woman was a really beautiful thing to see.
And stars of Mamma Mia.
They said, "Would you like to be Meryl Streep's friend in it?" And I said, "Yes."
One of the most successful movie musicals of all time.
The first day, Benny's on the piano. I said, "Let's sing Dancing Queen."
We look back at an incredible journey.
They have survived everything that the world can possibly throw at them.
And tell the remarkable story of ABBA's missing 40 years.
I still have faith in you. I see it now.
ABBA, the world's biggest selling pop band of all time, are back in force after a 40-year break.
There was a union of heart and mind.
It's really exciting. We've all been living off the original stuff from all those years ago.
What they've done is music history.
It's just the best. ABBA have magic.
This announcement in September 2021 of a return album, Voyage, and a brand new show was the news the world had been waiting for decades.
That was just like childlike wish fulfillment.
I'm very surprised because I thought they would definitely be never going to play again.
Fans from all over the world went wild when seeing Agnetha, Björn, Benny and Frida, now all in their 70s, reunited in a studio for the first time since they split 40 years ago.
I was really thrilled seeing these photos. Frida, she told me about this. She said it was so warm and so exciting and a bit strange, but yet very familiar.
It was so joyful to be together in the studio again, the 4 of us.
The initial project was shrouded in secrecy and at first was only meant to be 2 songs, I Still Have Faith in You and Don't Shut Me Down.
A while ago I heard the sound of children's laughter. Now it's quiet, so I guess they left the park.
One of those people entrusted with ABBA's comeback was renowned sound engineer Bernard Lohr.
It's going down, it's getting dark. I realize I'm cold.
It was Benny that told me first about the project and I thought it was really exciting. It was a bit scary first to see if the girls, for instance, would when they started singing, will this work? Björn and Benny was sitting in the control room just waiting to hear them sing together. Emotionally, it was, the biggest thing was when they started singing and it sounded so good.
I'm fired up, don't shut me down.
Hearing their harmonies converge for the first time in so many years, and you thought, yeah, that can only be ABBA.
Do I have it in me?
I think it's wonderful that they are there and that you can hear the age of the singers and that you can hear the maturity of them.
I felt a sense of like familiarity, which was really nice because I'm a big fan. So like hearing that, you know, was like, oh. It's like ABBA, you know, it's still ABBA and they're back.
You know it immediately, that style, that sound.
It's been 40 years and it was like no time had passed. Quite amazing.
The members of ABBA now look closer than ever. But rewind the clock just over 40 years and it was a completely different story. Back in 1981, after almost 10 years of huge success, ABBA seemed to be running out of steam.
The atmosphere within the group had changed a lot by then. There was a lot of tension between the four of them. I mean, they were both divorced couples now, and the motivation to do something kind of faded.
The feeling was not that happy feeling that it was in the beginning and during the whole period. It must be personal, I think. Björn and Benny have always been very close together, but I don't know about the female side.
Alongside tensions within the band, ABBA's popularity was also in decline.
Sweet dreams are made of these. Who am I to disagree? I travel the
With the emergence of a new youth culture in the early 80s, the Swedish pop band was losing its cool factor.
I think on every level they kind of then seemed a little bit naff, a little bit like they were kind of from that previous era of music. Suddenly ABBA began looking a little bit passé.
And when Benny and Björn went back in the studio in May 1982 for a tentative 9th album, the internal energy had gone.
They laid down tracks including I'm the City, You Owe Me One and Just Like That. But they weren't satisfied. It all felt very lackluster. So they had to scrap the idea of a 9th album because the songs just weren't coming.
Instead, they released a singles double album, ironically entitled The First 10 Years, which included a couple of new releases, Under Attack and The Day Before You Came.
I must have left my house at 8 because I always do.
A somber track sung by Agnetha on her own with a simple synthesizer melody.
I must have read the morning paper going into town.
The Day Before You Came tells it all. You've suddenly come to a song which is brilliant.
I must have made my desk around 9:15.
Well, it's not ABBA.
And stopped along the way to buy some Chinese food to go.
It was actually slightly more in keeping with that kind of dark and brooding aesthetic that was more zeitgeist, but coming from ABBA, I think there was just a jarring that people didn't quite understand.
It's now held up as an ABBA classic, but at the time only reached number 32 on the UK charts.
For ABBA, that was like a massive sort of failure.
I must have gone to bed around 10:15.
By the end of 82, with Björn and Benny remarried and Frida and Agnetha not, tensions amongst the band members were intolerable.
Ladies and gentlemen, all four members of ABBA.
Invited on Noel Edmonds' Late Breakfast show to promote their new tracks, you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife.
It was a difficult time because there was not a lot of motivation left for ABBA to continue, and Björn and Benny were both fathers again.
The papers recently have been full of stories that you're going to split eventually. You're not? No. Well, they're obviously relieved to hear it. I was just going to ask you if that ever occurred to you and who would make the decision. I mean, would it be a joint decision?
It would, yes.
We would.
The tension, the body language is almost unbearable. I mean, I sort of remember it looked strange to me at the time. Frida looks so incredible. Like she's got this punky haircut, which is a kind of classic post-divorce kind of gesture.
It's very telling because body language does not lie. So even though with their mouths they're saying, no, we're completely together, actually their behaviour is not very together.
What I'd like to do, really, is just ask you to publicly tell us your favourite ABBA tunes.
No, it's really a difficult decision because, I mean, Ben and Björn has written so many good songs.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, but you should know about that by now.
Well, you never said that.
Okay, so it's the first time.
No one knew it then, but this incredibly uncomfortable appearance would be ABBA's last ever TV interview and would mark the beginning of a long and tumultuous 40 years apart. By the end of 1982, Björn and Benny had lost interest in composing songs for ABBA, and plans for a new album were scrapped. For a year now, they had been focused on a very different project, away from Frida and Agnetha, with top musical lyricist Tim Rice.
We were at a stage with ABBA where we felt sort of the energy running out slightly. So it was time for a pause.
Björn and Benny decided that things were coming to a close before the women were aware of what the schism was going to be and what their plans were going to be after that point.
The news of Björn and Benny working with another songwriting legend, Tim Rice, got record producers excited. And soon, a concept album for a brand new musical called Chess, with West End superstar Elaine Paige, was underway. Set during a Cold War chess tournament between two grandmasters, one American, the other Soviet, Chess tells the story of their intense professional battle and a personal one over two women. And the most recognizable song from Chess is another female duet, featuring Elaine Paige and Barbara Dickson.
Wasn't it good? Oh, so good. Wasn't he fine? Oh, so fine. Isn't it madness? He can't be mine.
Of course, there is ABBA in the bottom. I mean, you can actually hear Frida and Agnetha.
More security.
Know Him So Well hit #1 in the UK charts and went on to become one of the best-selling female duets of all time.
He won't be mine.
Chess was fantastic. I mean, that was the best score of the 1980s.
I know him so.
On the back of the worldwide success of the concept album, a West End stage show in London was inevitable. Despite a staggering £4 million budget, the musical opened to mixed reviews. But the experience of making Chess gave Benny and Björn an exciting new career trajectory.
It was the beginning for them, I think, to branch out into musical theatre. It didn't put them off, did it?
While the boys had been immersed in chess, both Frida and Agnetha were left wondering where the next ABBA song was coming from.
They don't have the security of Björn and Benny anymore. Two men that they've been working very closely with, and all of a sudden you're like out on your own. It must be really scary.
Frida found herself in a unique position as being a solo artist by default.
And her musical inspiration came from an unlikely and very British rock star.
On her way to summer house, her daughter played her a cassette, which was Face Value, the album of Phil Collins.
In the Air Tonight, the album's standout hit, was darkly atmospheric and featured angry lyrics concerning Phil Collins' bitter divorce. And it cut Frida to the core.
She loved the Face Value album that Phil and I had done together. It was a personal thing as well. I think she felt attracted to the songs that he'd written related to his divorce.
Inspired by Face Value, Frida found the strength to break free from ABBA and record a solo album. And she asked Phil Collins to produce it.
I remember being amazed when Phil said, "Oh, Frida from ABBA has asked us to do an album. Let's do it."
Hugh Padgham was part of the all-British crew who, with Phil Collins, headed to Stockholm to record the album in ABBA's very own Polar Studios.
I was very, very tense and nervous. It was the first thing I've done outside ABBA, and all the people were new for me. I have met Phil twice, and the others I hadn't met at all.
Everything was kind of strange to her, and she was so nervous and that she had to call in the sick the next day, so the second day of recording. She was kind of subdued and a little bit timid, and she didn't really dare to say what she wanted in the album, what she wanted to be like. Phil was kind of annoyed about this and tried to convince her to speak out and to say, "It's your album, baby," he said. "You have to decide."
You made me look into your eyes.
But eventually, Frida and her new band bonded.
Well, when she found out that they were a team, a kind of small family, then she kind of felt at ease and found her self-confidence again.
Well, you know what I mean, man.
But Frida's attempt to go solo and find her own style away from ABBA raised an eyebrow with their manager and Polar Studios boss, Stig Andersson.
Stig Andersson wasn't happy at all with the way the album was going, because what he wanted was songs, pop songs with a very strong hook.
I remember Stig saying something that made Frida cry. Stig didn't think that there was a hit on the album, and he asked Björn and Benny to come up with some songs.
It's almost like, well, she can't possibly do it on her own, undermining the potential that a woman might actually have something to offer in her own right.
But Frida was quite forceful. She said, "No way."
Frida proved Stig wrong, and the stomping title track, There's Something Going On, tellingly about a woman who suspects her lover is having an affair, was an international hit.
She clearly said, "Phil, whatever you did on In the Air Tonight, I'd like quite a lot more of that."
She was marking out her territory as a solo artist. She's saying, forget about ABBA. I don't sound like that anymore. I don't look like that anymore. You need to take me as I am now.
The critical and commercial success of the album was just what Frida needed as she moved further away from ABBA.
He was extremely proud of the record. This was something she did by herself.
I imagine Frida was like, "There you go, you know, I can do it without you lot."
On a wave of solo success, Frida cut herself free from her old record label and moved to London.
She wanted to reinvent herself, and she was kind of held back in Sweden because she was reminded of everything of her life before, of Benny, of a divorce.
Despite there being no news of an official ABBA split, now Frida had scored solo success, Agnetha looked to do the same. And ABBA looked increasingly like a thing of the past. Like Frida, Agnetha turned to a music industry giant to produce her solo album.
Mike Chapman was a very famous and successful producer in the 80s. He'd worked with lots of bands, the most famous being, of course, Blondie with the amazing Debbie Harry. And he was all about hits, mainstream success, but retaining coolness at the same time.
This was something she wanted to do. It was somewhere she wanted to be.
It was with a producer who was encouraging her and challenging her and pushing her voice in slightly different directions than perhaps Benny and Björn had been doing. So it was a very happy atmosphere for her.
Wrap Your Arms Around Me was a very positive summer kind of album with a lot of romanticism in it.
Agnetha, who had never been a fan of interviews during the ABBA years, was now having to brave the cameras and promote her album alone.
It was something she knew she had to do rather than something she wanted to do.
Despite or because of maybe her beauty, there was a nervousness about just being seen as being the face rather than being a serious musician and a serious professional.
The constant focus on her physicality, her beauty, her sexiness was extremely destructive for Agnetha. It hurt her sense of confidence as an artist.
On the back of her successful collaboration with Phil Collins, Frida was confidently building her solo career outside Sweden and ABBA. Determined to continue her reinvention as a successful solo star, she travelled to Paris to work with a young and high-flying producer, Steve Lillywhite.
Steve Lillywhite at that point was absolutely at the top of the production tree. He'd worked with some really, really cutting edge kind of bands in the 70s, worked with Ultravox and Susie and the Banshees, the Psychedelic Furs, had this sort of great kind of cachet in that experimental and electronic music.
Now back in the studio, in a foreign land and with a complete new set of musicians, Frida was once again setting herself a huge challenge.
She is freshening it up all over again. She's very experimental. She's very much at the cutting edge.
Well, Frida was very positive about working with Steve Lillywhite, but everyone was very young. Frida was, I think, 10 years older than the producer.
Frida had a strong personal input in her new album, Shine. Despite Frida's enthusiasm for an album she was extremely proud of, Shine flopped.
Frida was very disappointed because she really felt 100% for this album. She felt like she was opened up creatively.
She probably wanted to try and prove the Stig Andersons of this world wrong. So when the album wasn't successful commercially, that would have knocked that confidence back quite considerably.
It seemed like success was kind of fading away, so everything kind of stopped.
Her confidence knocked, and approaching 40, Frida quit the fast pace of London. In search of a new way of life, she headed to the tranquility of Switzerland.
Frida's reinvented herself multiple times in her life, and she has a kind of driving ambition. So even though she endures failures and setbacks, she's not completely tanked by it. She simply changes direction. It takes a huge amount of inner strength to be able to do that.
Back in Sweden, Agnetha was also struggling with the tough realities of going solo. An ongoing battle with the tabloid press made life increasingly unbearable.
Agnetha was the honeypot that the flies of the Swedish tabloid press started to swarm around. Because she was always a very private and sensitive person, they kind of latched on that and wanted to know more. She was no longer protected by the ABBA bubble, and she found it very difficult to cope with it.
Throughout the 1980s, unpleasant and often fictitious tabloid tales concerning Agnetha and her private life appeared on an almost daily basis.
They were linking her romantically to men that she wasn't involved with. There were stories on the front pages that she was pregnant when she wasn't. And then when a baby didn't appear, the stories were Agnetha has suffered a miscarriage.
Feeling under siege from the media, Agnetha became increasingly reclusive, refusing to do any promotional work on releasing new material.
She just didn't want to do that anymore. I mean, there's loads of interviews you can see where you can see she just doesn't want to be there.
The only recourse she had was to say no. I'm not doing your interviews. So she began to withdraw more and more into seclusion.
In 1988, she flew to London to promote an album on the Wogan chat show.
But one would have imagined that you would have bought yourself the little house on the fjord and just retired.
Well, I have.
Well, you have.
Shortly after her BBC appearance, she moved to the quiet island of Eckerö, 45 minutes outside Stockholm. After 2 decades in the limelight, an exhausted Agnetha was about to disappear from the public eye.
I thought I have to have a little break now, and I've done so much. I want to be with my children and in my home and with the horses and with my dogs.
Meanwhile, over 1,000 miles away in Switzerland, Frida's life was about to mirror that of a fairy tale when she met and fell in love with a German prince.
Och Russo förändrade mitt liv enormt mycket. Och han förde med sig glädje och kärlek och 2 nya barn, mina styvdöttrar.
She looked more relaxed and more at ease with herself. She had overcome a lot of insecurities. She has a more classy look now. She's not so rock-edged anymore.
The romance with Prince Russo Rus resulted in a marriage in 1992.
Frida's personal journey has been completely fascinating. She went from being the orphaned child to a global superstar, to stepping away from fame, and then marrying into German royalty, on top of being musical royalty herself.
With Frida living a new, exclusive life in Switzerland, Agnetha retreating to her remote Swedish island, and Benny and Björn dedicating themselves to their Swedish musical, by the early 90s, the former ABBA members couldn't have been further apart. But an unexpected revival was about to send the world ABBA crazy once again.
I've been cheated by you since I drove away.
I really fell in love with them when I took my daughter and my nieces to see Mamma Mia the musical.
June 1992.
This is definitely one of the most surreal nights of my life.
Appearing in front of a huge crowd, Benny and Björn were invited on stage by U2 to play a stripped-down version of their absolute classic hit, Dancing Queen. 10 years after the band's unofficial split, they were reconnecting with ABBA's music.
There was a moment when Benny and Björn changed their mind. Instead of running away from ABBA, in the 90s they decided to turn around and run straight back towards ABBA.
If you change your mind, I'm the first in line. Honey, I'm still free.
After being ignored for almost a decade, the music of ABBA captured the zeitgeist once again.
There was absolutely a need and a desire for optimism. The 90s went back into having this no-holds-barred, front and centre pop music. So it was really a great breeding ground decade for the shiny pop that ABBA had been making to come back into vogue again.
In 1992, British band Erasure paid tribute to their favourite group and released an EP of ABBA covers.
I mean, I just had a passion. I really had a passion for them, and I just thought, I thought they were undersung. These songs were so kind of impressed on me. I had to do them. We just had to do them. I had to do them live, had to do them just to get them out of my system, the songs.
You wanted to leave me there, afraid of a love affair, but I think you know that I can't let go.
ABBA-esque gave Erasure their first #1 single in the UK chart and bolstered ABBA's renewed popularity.
Something was bubbling in the zeitgeist, and we just happened to put this thing out at the same time, and I'm really glad that I was part of it.
ABBA's record label jumped on the revival wagon, and that same year released ABBA Gold, a compilation of all their greatest hits that cemented a legacy that Björn and Benny could never have dreamt of.
I've been cheated by you since I don't know when.
The songs are just classic pop songs, and a classic good pop song just won't die.
The album sold over 5 million copies within a year of release.
I don't even know if it has been out of the charts in the 30 years since it was released. That really was the catalyst of their reappraisal.
As the resurging interest in ABBA's music grew, in London, Björn and Benny were in talks about an exciting new project. A musical built around their greatest hits that would introduce ABBA to an even wider audience. The musical was the brainchild of theatre producer Judy Kramer, who came up with the idea while working on Chess with Björn and Benny a decade earlier.
It was one woman's obsession with ABBA that actually got this musical off the ground. I mean, she lives ABBA, I think, Judy.
Let me do this, please let me do this.
And they said no, for starters.
But on a warm summer evening in 1995, after enjoying Grease on the West End stage, Björn had a change of heart and saw the potential in Judy Kramer's idea.
And then they said, yes, come up with a good script.
Now under pressure to come up with a good story, Judy Kramer turned to playwright Katherine Johnson.
The plot of Mamma Mia was hashed out at Paddington Station, probably over a congealed sandwich and a cold coffee, by Judy Kramer and her collaborator Katherine Johnson, who was a traditional, very respected, old-school theatre lady.
Thoughts started spinning, and suddenly Katherine had this vision.
What about a young girl? She doesn't know who her father is, and she's getting married, and she invites 3 guys who could be her dad based on her mum's diary, and they all show up at this lovely Grecian event.
And then Judy just said to her, you're not taking the train, you're sitting down. Now we're working.
When word got out that production was underway, the project made headlines all over the world. When the show opened in London on the 6th of April 1999, it was the talk of the town.
If you weren't at the premiere, at the first night, I mean, forget it, you're just in social Siberia.
The musical's launch coincided beautifully with the 25th anniversary of ABBA winning the Eurovision Song Contest with Waterloo. The audience went wild.
I was cheated by you, and I think you know when.
I don't think I've ever experienced something like that. It was like, I don't know, a mashup between late night disco and theater. It was amazing.
Oh, it's magic. People were chuckling, and then people were laughing, and then people were dancing and laughing.
There's a fire within my soul.
Mamma Mia became one of the highest grossing musicals of all time.
Oh, you cannot forget everything. Whoa, whoa, Mamma Mia. Now I really know.
With a tidal wave of new ABBA fans, the world media became obsessed with a possible ABBA reunion.
Are you surprised that ABBA keeps coming back and back and back? Are you surprised?
Yeah. No, we never came back. That's the good thing about ABBA.
No, we never reunited.
But on that opening night, while Björn and Benny were heralding an ABBA revival, Agnetha and Frida were nowhere to be seen.
What do Agnetha and Frida think about this? Have they seen it?
We don't know yet because they haven't been here yet. No. They should come because they are as much a part of this as we are.
700 miles away in Switzerland, Frida had found inner peace close to nature with her beloved husband, Prince Russo. And she was slowly reconnecting with music. But on a dark winter's day in 1998, her happiness was shattered when she received the tragic news no mother wants to hear.
She lost a daughter after a car accident, which was a tragic event which struck very hard.
This tragedy left Frida in a state of shock for many years, as she revealed in this intimate 2016 interview.
Det tog väldigt lång tid. Det tog väldigt många år. Och av en obegriplig sorg. Jag vet, man känner sådär att vi börjar gråta, det ska jag inte göra.
While dealing with this unbearable grief, a year later, tragedy struck again. Her beloved husband Russo passed away at the age of 49, leaving a huge void in her life, as she reflected in the same interview.
Och han var en absolut fantastisk, underbar, spirituell, rolig människa. Jag älskade honom överallt. Så det var klart en jättesorg att det här skulle drabba oss, att han fick cancer, 49 år gammal.
Plunged into deep grief, Frida once again stepped away from music and public life. In her island seclusion, Agnetha was also deep in grief. After the tragic loss of her mother, who took her own life, and the death of her father soon after.
This was a very dark period for her, probably the worst period in her life. And she just needed to be left alone. She needed time to process all of these traumatic things that had happened to her.
But it made her vulnerable. It made her vulnerable to being targeted, not just physically and practically, but also emotionally.
Agnetha was free to rebuild her fragile emotional health. And one of the ways she started to do that was listening to music again. And it was the music that she had fallen in love with as a teenager. It was the music of Connie Francis and Dusty Springfield. And now, 40 years later, they inspired her to be a singer again.
After 17 years of silence, Agnetha returned to music.
It was amazing to see Agnetha coming back, being able to represent herself now as a more mature woman.
I'm a big admirer of her voice, the way she sings. I think she's one of the best Swedish vocalists ever.
Despite Agnetha keeping public appearances to a minimum, fans and the media began speculating about an ABBA reunion.
If she's now interested in making music again, is this going to be the key that unlocks the great ABBA reunion?
But instead of a reunion, Benny and Björn preferred to focus their efforts on developing the hugely successful Mamma Mia franchise and took it to another level.
Well, my agent rang me up. I was standing in the kitchen and him saying, they're going to make a film of Mamma Mia, the musical. And I said, yeah. And they said, would you like to be Meryl Streep's friend in it? And I said, yes, of course I would. I love that musical, yes.
Based on the stage show, the movie attracted a stellar cast. When the cast met for the first time to record the soundtrack at Air Studios in London, they were faced with the musical complexity of ABBA songs.
It was a bit of a baptism of fire. First of all, you go and you meet Meryl Streep, and I've never met her. Then you're taken through, and there are the ABBA boys. Benny's on the piano. He said, let's sing Dancing Queen. God, we've only just got in. I've only rehearsed a couple of days. So we were all around the piano doing that, but it was fine.
To ensure the ABBA magic was kept in the soundtrack, Benny and Björn attended most recording sessions with their trusted sound engineer, Bernard Lohr.
They are actors, not professional singers, so I had to work a little bit more in editing and fixing.
They want it right. It's their music, it's their baby, isn't it? So you felt a huge responsibility as well, much more responsibility because they were there. But they gave me confidence. Not the opposite. You'd think, oh, good, but they didn't. They certainly gave me confidence, yeah.
Mamma Mia was to become one of the highest-grossing musical movies of all time.
It's just a really intelligent, huge move for keeping that ABBA legacy alive. It's like this sort of cyclical thing that can happen across the decades.
And when the film premiered in Stockholm in July 2008, ABBA fans were in for a treat. Björn and Benny were joined for the first time in 22 years by Frida and Agnetha, who'd stepped out of the shadows to surprise the cast.
The photographers were screaming out for them just to be the four of them, but they always refused because they felt that if there was a photograph of the four of them, that would be the photograph that would be in the press. And this wasn't about ABBA, this was about Mamma Mia.
It may have been about Mamma Mia, but seeing them together had fans starting to think what was until then the unthinkable.
That whole kind of excitement about the what if, could it really happen, definitely came back in, and people started thinking, well, you know, never say never. Keep our fingers crossed, maybe it will.
Agnetha embraced the Mamma Mia musical phenomenon and started attending promotional events.
In coming back out into public life, Agnetha is leaving the door open for the ABBA reunion because let's not forget, they never broke up.
A couple of years later, at a private event, Agnetha went back on stage, this time with Frida. And that night, the two of them truly brought the dream of an ABBA reunion one step closer.
We would love to dedicate this song to you from us, Agnetha and myself.
2016 was the 50th anniversary of the day that Benny and Björn met. Agnetha and Frida naturally were invited, but what we didn't think happened was that they would get on stage and sing a song.
We can face it together, the way all friends.
The only record of that special moment is this mobile phone footage of Frida and Agnetha reunited in song for the first time in over 30 years.
It was totally right that they were on stage. That was great. And also the fact that they were singing the way old friends do, because that's what it is. They are old friends.
With friendships rekindled, in 2018 it finally happened. ABBA announced they were getting back together for a very special show.
When the news came out, everyone just had this sort of frisson of excitement, thinking, does this mean they're going to tour again? Is there an album? What's going to be happening?
But it wasn't the return that everyone was expecting.
I have a vision of the future.
And in that future, ABBA were to return not as themselves, but as avatars. Using motion capture technology, an extraordinary series of concerts were to see ABBA return as digitally animated characters based on their 1979 younger selves.
It's something in their makeup and their psyche that they're always kind of ahead of the game, and nobody else has done this, have they, before? A virtual tour. Brilliant.
And for ABBA fans, the dream was about to get even better. Whilst working on the Avatar project, the urge to make new music became irresistible. For the first time in almost 4 decades, ABBA recorded a new song behind closed doors.
I think they kept it a secret to see if it will work. I mean, to come back after 40 years, it gives you insecurity. Maybe, is this the right thing? But to hear the voices of Frida and Agnetha is fantastic.
I still have faith in you. I see it now.
You couldn't have chosen a more perfect ABBA comeback song than I Still Have Faith in You.
It's like a love song to themselves and to history and to time.
There was a union.
I see a sense of reconciliation and an increased comfort between the members of the band.
That song to me was a beautiful story of how they can look back at all their memories that they have shared and experienced and still be excited to create more. I think that's very inspiring.
I still have faith in you.
Since going their separate ways 40 years ago, the four members of ABBA have experienced a roller coaster of triumphs, adversity, and tragedy.
They went through pain and trials and tribulations and suffering, and yet they're still friends.
And underpinning those 4 tumultuous decades is a musical legacy that has grown beyond all expectations.
My God, that is an incredible tribute. Incredible to think that somebody's had the career, and here we are 40 years later, and it's still as prevalent.
I don't know what kind of artist I would have been, or if I even would have been here right now if it wasn't for ABBA.
It's a gift. They got the gift.
It kind of goes on and on and on. It gets to people. It's magic.